we have Luke M., our Area 44 Panel 75 delegate and former DCM of District 28.
Luke.
All right. And he is interviewing Billy N., past delegate Panel 49 and past GSB trustee. Welcome, Billy.
Thanks.
All right. So take it away, Luke. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Caitlin. I don't know if I can remember what I just said. My name's Luke M. I'm an alcoholic. And it's my honor and privilege to be here tonight as a member of District 28, close to my home group. My home group is Rule 62 in Asbury Park. And for any of you that don't know, we are the current reigning champ on the dessert contest, the Bake Off. It's just the facts. It's just the facts. I don't know how it's gotten controversial so quickly, but I got a feeling it's got something to do with the two guys sitting up here tonight. So if that's any indication of the way the night's going, we better lock the doors and sign NDAs. But I'm grateful to be here. I do currently serve Area 44 as the Panel 75 delegate. It's been my honor and privilege to do that job. It's been the longest and the fastest 2 years of my life. And I'm just starting to think about what comes next for me. And because I've got good service sponsorship and good mentors all over AA, I know I'll be pointed in the right direction. And like Caitlin said, my favorite job that I've done since getting to Alcoholics Anonymous is I got to be the DCM for District 28, and Mary Beth was my alternate. We got a couple of other district servants, past district servants in the room. I'm not going to go through the whole level of the triangle tonight, but I do want to ask for the GSRs that are in the room. Because the GSRs, please raise your hands. Awesome. And anybody else who's in the room tonight who serves beyond the group, if you could just raise your hand so we get an idea of the people we're talking to. Great, great, awesome. I see some section coordinators, some committee chairs, some DCMs. So we've got a nice little blend of our upside-down triangle in the room tonight. So we'll try to remember that as we get into the conversation. So it's my honor and privilege to sit here and interview Billy tonight. I've got a list of questions. We're going to nail them to the floor and really get to the bottom of things. But we're going to start off with the stuff that's normal and that's comfortable, right? The things that we all do when we get to the microphone. We want to find out who is Billy, who's this guy that we're going to ask these questions tonight. So with that, Billy, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us your home group, your sobriety date, your service resume.
So my home group's a primary purpose group in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. That's where I live most of the time when I'm not here. We meet 7 a.m. Monday to Friday. When I'm here, people say, do I have a home group? I believe what the literature says. I should have one home group. But I am commonly at the Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. at the Manasquan Women's Club. That meeting is super important to me. And I guess I would tell you that in my career, which I'm trying to end, but in my career, because I traveled a lot, I always picked, most of the time, a daytime home group once I left New Jersey, because that met 7 days a week, because then I knew whatever 4 or 3 days I was in town that I could be connected to that group, because that's how important I believe a home group is. So my sobriety date's January the 15th of 1990. I guess you want to know a little of that. If there's any members of Al-Anon here, I just want to give a big shout out. I probably would not be a member of AA today if my mother wasn't a member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon family groups. So I didn't always speak this lovingly about Al-Anon because I'm a teenage chronic alcoholic. You know, I know sometimes you hear people say there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and a head full of AA, and I would say there is something worse. A belly full of booze and your mother's head full of Al-Anon is just tragic. And, you know, and the other thing, you know, I came to AA, you know, in junior high, my last year of junior high. Didn't get sober until 9 years later, but in and out that whole time. But between my mother's Al-Anon membership and then a judge in a juvenile court, but, you know, I carry his, I'm sure he's deceased now, but I've just ran into a lot of unfortunate people in AA, you know, who unfortunately have hinted to young people that it's impossible to be an alcoholic and be a teenager or be young or that you couldn't possibly hit a bottom. And I'm very grateful. Then when I was a teenager, someone whispered in that judge's ear, hey, if you come across a boy or a girl, not even a man or a woman, a boy or a girl who has a problem with alcohol, it was the 70s. It was very popular to have a contract with your parents. I'm sure there's people my age in this room, I'm not outing you, I don't like to out myself. But there was a TV show called The Afternoon Special. And it was always about a tragic member of the family, like the bulimic daughter, the junkie uncle, the gambling uncle, the alcoholic husband. But one of the things that had become very popular at that time was to have a contract with your parents. And I had to have a contract with my mother. And the last thing on that contract said, William will attend meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when I think that sometimes people in AA give young people a hard time, I'm like, it had to be somebody, a friend, a family member, or a service person who whispered in that judge's ear. And I think that's the difficult part about institutional service. In Regulus, like Maniac AA on the front lines, where you meet some fellow maniac who on day 0 or day 5 or week 2, if you become close to that person, you get to see the progress. Like a year later, it's like ridiculous. In institutional service, it's not as much immediate gratification. It's that you're doing things to help people find AA, and you don't know where, that snowball rolls down the hill. So it's not as immediate as regular. So
It reminds me of a question a mutual friend of ours used to ask all the time when he was doing anything in AA. Our late friend John Q, he used to say, how did you get here? Right? And I think about my early entry into Alcoholics Anonymous. It started before I knew I was coming. And I think it was the treatment committee that was organizing, bringing commitments into the local detox that I just happened to end up in, and members of AA came in and shared their stories. And I just remember that moment of, they weren't telling me about service, they weren't telling me about what the treatment committee was, or who sent them there, or what district it was. They talked to me about the fact that they were alcoholics, and they convinced me that they were alcoholic, right? They didn't try to convince me that I was alcoholic, they told me their stories, and they convinced me that they had this thing and that they found something that was working for them. So when I think of drawing my straight line to how I got into AA, it's the treatment committee. Do you think you can draw a straight line back?
yeah, John always said that if everybody in AA honestly drew their line back, everybody would get to an AA service committee. Even if it's the person who got you into AA that got from an AA service committee, whether it's treatment or corrections or calling in a group and getting, how do I find a meeting, or using a meeting directory, like eventually all of us, if we trace our roots back, have been brought here by some service committee, indirectly or directly.
And I think that's kind of the full circle on that thing you were talking about. When we're doing this institutional service, we don't always see the ripple hit the shore, right? But we're throwing those pebbles in and waiting to see what happens. And if you stay around long enough, you don't always see it immediately, but you see the payoff of the district work out in the community coming, and you see people coming in and becoming members of Alcoholics Anonymous because of those efforts. And that's something I found really rewarding over the years. Don't get to see it very often, but when you do, it's like, all right, we got one.
I heard this non-AA person, he was a warden speaking at an AA convention, and he was talking about that at one of the prisons he was at, they had a riot, a bad riot, like where half of the facility was still actively rioting, like shut down for like 14 hours. And so the whole place is surrounded by the state police, and he told the story at this convention that as he was out there on the perimeter, who shows up at like the gate but the 2 AA people who come there every week. And so, of course, they're arguing, because that's how we are. We got to get in there and get the meeting going. And, the guards are saying, no, we have a riot on one side of the prison, nobody's getting in. But he said, when he was asked on the radio, he said, yeah, let those 2 guys in. We need more of those people. So people outside of AA, our friends, speak sometimes often louder than we do.
Absolutely. Now, I think there's a couple of components that give us entry into AA, right? We talked about the kind of the opportunity, right, created by service, by these committees, but the willingness comes from a place of complete brokenness. When you think back to your drinking career, I know you got an early start and you went pretty hard, pretty fast. Do you remember when you experienced that powerlessness and what that felt like? I want to know what it looked like, what it felt like, what it smelled like in the room the day you realized you were cooked.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was 17 years old, I had to see the school psychologist in order to stay in school 1 hour a week. And I remember when I thought I figured this out, I told him that if I could just not do shots, if I could just drink beers, that it was, I heard these people at AA say it was the first drink that got them drunk, but for me it was the first shot after like the 8th beer, And I was so young that I would hear things, I say it all the time, I would call people Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. I was so young. Mrs. So-and-so was my crossing guard. If my mom heard me call her Jerry, she'd slap me across the face. Like, I'm from that generation. You call people Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. But I could never put the two and two together about how distorted my relationship with alcohol was. I think when I realized I was cooked was probably about a year before my current sobriety date, when I finally, for some reason, figured out that I can't stop drinking once I start. Like, I just can't stop. Like other people do. I remember hearing people in AA saying nothing good happens after midnight, but I was young. I was like, everything good happens after midnight. Like, in fact, the later the night goes. But about a year before I got sober, I had been to enough AA meetings where I kind of figured out the physical side of what the big book talks about, that I cannot safely drink. And I would run into people who would give me hints. I went to DWI school the first time when I was like 17 years old. And I remember a guy there telling me, just drink white wine spritzers when you want to take it easy. And I didn't even know what a white wine spritzer was. But I tried, and I found out I can drink like 50 of them. Like that's what I know about white wine spritzers. But I did finally, between hearing enough stories, which is why I think, meetings and people sharing their story, sometimes we get so uppity that we say, oh, I'm not going to tell you my drunk story. I'm just going to tell you, I live in the solution. But newcomers don't. There's an Al-Anon speaker, Mary Pearl, and one of the things she says, I think it's very interesting. She says, the newcomer won't ask you for your help unless they know you have their problem. And so I remember, I don't know if anybody here was at Lamplighters last night, but I heard a story at Lamplighters last night that was like miraculous. Like, I could not believe what I heard. I could believe it, but I am grateful because I finally did figure out about a year before I came in that I can't physically drink.
So you talked about what it looked like in the house. You got this contract for your mom. You got to go to AA meetings. You have that moment of complete brokenness, or at least I can't drink anymore. So now you kind of come into the thing. What were your first impressions when you got here?
Well, I never left. In New York, it's always who's counting days, In Florida, it's who has 30 days, who has 60 days. So I've raised my hand many times and said, I'm Billy, I'm an alcoholic. I have 17 days. I have 18 days. I have 20 days. But when I came in the last time on January 5th of 1990, number one, I owed the courts some time. I was going to have to go inside, and I was going to have to do some time. I also, when I think about that, it's a good question when you ask about that, because we don't shoot our wounded here. And so by the time my sobriety date, this current one, I had been disappointing people for 9 years in AA. Or maybe I wasn't disappointing them. Maybe they just expected it. I don't know. But no one ever, did not welcome me back. They told me some things I didn't like, like a parking lot, like outside. I remember there was this guy I hated in Comac, Long Island. That's where he went to meetings. And because he asked me one night, he said, I thought you said your license was suspended last week. I said, my license is suspended. And he said, but you drove here tonight. And I was like, but I need to go to AA for the probation department. And he was like, yeah, we don't really do that here. But so I never really left. I just was one of those young kids who was afraid to throw in the towel, that my life would be over. Like, at that time, I'm 17, 18, 19. When I came in, I was 14, 15, 16. I was sitting in church basements with people that my mother went to church with and played bingo with and canasta and God knows what else. And I'm thinking, like, this is my life? Like I always talk about my first anniversary meeting. If you're, I have so much respect for Al-Anon, because Al-Anon teaches things that we don't like, but that are very helpful to the people who love us, because loving us is tragic. And they teach people how to not deal with our BS and our dishonesty and our false promises and everything else. But the one thing an Al-Anon parent wants, and a lot of times if I'm at a convention, I can probably pick an Al-Anon mother out of the audience by their reaction to my story, because my mother would say 50 rosaries a day, because all an Al-Anon mother or father wants is a sober son or daughter. That's it. So you do know that the one thing you have to manipulate your parents with is AA. So when I was 16 years old, I told my mother I had heard about this big anniversary meeting. My mother would have driven me to the North Pole. My mother would have driven me to Montana. Her son didn't just all of a sudden come home from school and say, Mom, I can't wait to go to AA tonight. Now, I just wanted to smoke and be out of the house because I was grounded. But I remember that night, I always say an old lady turned the lights down halfway. She was like 34. An old guy brought a cake in with candles on it, and they all started singing happy birthday. And I sat there like thinking, like, 26, 36, 46, like even if I live 30 years, this is going to be my big night out of the month. The big AA anniversary night. And I always try to tell new people that and not to forget to tell it, because I'm not a person who likes to say I'm wrong, but I was never more wrong in my life than I was that night. Like that, I thought AA was going to rob me of a life, you know? I mean, I don't know where everybody here will be on October 3rd. I know where I'll be. I'll be at the Sphere if I'm alive, listening to Metallica, right? That's where I'll be Saturday night, right? But I didn't know that I could still go to, like, 2 years ago, I went with a bunch of my sober buddies to Power Trip to 6 of the greatest heavy metal bands in the world over a weekend in Palm Springs, and smoked cigars and drank iced coffee all weekend. But I didn't know that was possible when I was 16 years old. I thought that I would be sentenced to some kind of regular suburban life from hell. And I wanted something better. I just didn't know that you could be sober and also have that. I think a lot of young people face that dilemma.
I think I identify with that a lot. I mean, I came into AA and life fell down around me, right? I didn't have a job to go back to. Family didn't want me around. There wasn't a relationship to go home to. And one of the struggles of early sobriety was looking around and saying, like, what kind of life can I have in AA? And then somebody beat me with the big book and showed me a vision for you. And I was like, if this is the best you got for offer, I got to reconsider. When you came in and you're trying to figure it out, you say you stick to AA, no matter how many times you drink, you're counting days, you're going through that thing. What are people approaching you with at that time? Are they just letting you sit there and giving you a cup of coffee? Are they coming at you with the literature, or the slogans?
You know, that is, I do not like to put down anybody in AA. But I also know that, like, I went to my first Joe and Charlie Big Book workshop at the New York Marriott Marquis in 1993, right? Now, I hated AA for a long time, and then I hated a subset of people in AA. Like, there's AA, if there's 50 people in a meeting, and then there's like the 4 or 5 SEAL Team 6 of AA in every meeting, who like you totally despise, right? And so when I went to that big book workshop, one of the things I realized that Sunday afternoon was like, I could at least admit to myself that most of the people I didn't like in AA, what they had in common was they loved the literature. But I also know that like, I can't blame any AA meeting for me not getting sober. The truth is, if you got out of your parking lot, your car, with a big book, I knew you were a lunatic. Like, we have books at the meeting. You don't got to show off and bring your own. And if you got out of your car with a big book with a leather cover on it, with a space for your coin in the right-hand side, then I knew you were. So I was not outside shaking people down to take me through the big book, you know? I was too arrogant and too tough, and I was so afraid that I would lose the fun in my life. And that's what I think, you know, I think that's the hard choice that every newcomer has, regardless of age, is it could be Friday afternoon of a weekend, and you know that if you drink, all bets are off, and it could be big trouble. But when it's 9 o'clock after the 8 o'clock meeting on Friday night, and everybody goes home, and you're like, where is everybody? Like, no, they go home. They have lives. But like, do you know how painful it is for some people to be alone from 8 or 9 o'clock at night until 2 or 3 in the morning when I go to sleep? So the damage of drinking does not feel as bad to me as the pain of not drinking and being alone. So I try not to judge miracles, whether it's the people. I try to believe that there's a lot of different. There's people who are excellent at taking people through the big book, and they're great long-term emotional sponsors. But especially in New York City AA, there's a lot of what I would call train wreck specialists. Like they're like a mobile alcoholic MASH unit. They are some way able to keep somebody alive that should be dead tonight. And next thing you know, they get a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But I think for me, I needed to just, I think we say it, it takes what it takes. And we all have different barometers of pain.
Makes sense. Pain is a thing that's motivated me into action a lot of times. I think about the last 2 years, right? Getting more involved in service and getting busier in AA. It's a cool thing to have somebody fill your calendar for you and tell you the things that you have to do for Alcoholics Anonymous on any given week. And I've been thinking a lot about coming out the other side of that and what that looks like. And I had kind of the realization that you kind of hinted at is like I've gotten very, I'm a connoisseur of fine Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I want my meetings served to me on a silver platter. I want speakers that are sticking to the literature and, you know, this like the really good AA, right? And in doing that, it really made me ask myself what it means for me to be an AA member, right? And it looked a little bit different in the beginning, and that got me back into the clubhouse, right? I've been going to the Shoreline Club again a couple times a week, spending some time there in that MASH unit AA. And I think what I've arrived at is like, for me, what it means to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous is I make myself available. Right. So what does it mean to you to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous?
So, I mean, and that's a great question, and you're rotating soon out as a delegate, but, you know, the thing you said about the Shoreline Club and other places, like, I know sitting at a convention with 1,000 people, and, you know, the speaker finishes, and everybody's online thanking the speaker, and then they walk down the aisle to go out of the room. And I've been there when like one person is coming by saying, that's who asked that person to speak. They were the worst speaker I ever heard. I can't believe they were even allowed to speak here. And then 10 feet behind them is somebody with tears in their eyes saying, oh my God, this was a miracle. That person just told my story. I wasn't even going to come tonight. So I think a lot of AA is, and I guess myself, I've gone through it, is God is either everything or he's not. And no matter how much you're an expert in whatever you think you're an expert in AA, you are not more powerful than God. And sometimes God works in mysterious ways that may not be, that people may not notice. I always think of the Chuck C. story of that he's speaking at a meeting in California, and somebody told him that somebody was at their first meeting. And so he admits on this tape, like, that he was saying to himself as he was going to the podium, I got to tell the best story I've ever told in my life tonight. Like, this guy's life is in my hands. And then he admits on that recording that driving home to his house, looking in the rearview mirror, he told himself, God, I really hit it out of the park tonight. That was the best lead I've ever given in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then a year later, he goes back to speak at that same local meeting, and who's there but the guy who had one day, the last time he was there. And he admits on this tape that he says, talking to himself, I knew I hit it out of the park. I knew that was the best talk I ever gave. And then he admits on this tape that after the meeting was over, he says to himself, you know, I got to find out what line it was that saved his life. Like, what particular piece of gold was it that saved his life? And so he goes up and talks to the guy. And he says, oh, you know, I was here last year. It was your first night. I'm so glad to see you back. He goes, you know, I have a question. Like, what got you to your second meeting? Like, why'd you come back? And the guy says two interesting things. The first was, he looks right at him and says, you know, I was so out of it that night, I don't even remember who spoke. So that's the first thing he says. And the second thing he says is, I had been living on the streets and I had burnt down my family relationships and no one had wanted to be kind to me because I wasn't kind to other people. He said, but I ran out of cigarettes at the table, and this elderly lady sitting across the table from me in the back of the meeting noticed I ran out of cigarettes and rolled one across the table to me and pushed her matches over. And that was the first kind thing anybody had ever done for me and since I could remember. And so I think about that story a lot because no matter how much you're an expert in any facet of AA, like, kindness and compassion should not be out of style.
Yeah.
At all.
That's huge. That's huge. I mean, I think about when I first crash landed in Monmouth County, right? I came to Monmouth County because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was in a treatment center. I was getting out of the treatment center. I got connected with a sponsor, and he kidnapped me. He dragged me here kicking and screaming, and he started bringing me to meetings, and I was terrified. I know nobody can believe that looking at me today, right? But I couldn't make eye contact with people. I couldn't have a conversation. And my sponsor's a jerk, just driving me around from AA meeting to AA meeting, making me make coffee. And I'm jumping out of my skin and doing everything I can to avoid people's eye line, just try to stay invisible. And one of those first meetings I was at, this guy, Doug S., he saw me from across the room, and he did this thing every time I tried to look away, and he got on my eye line, and he said, hey, man, I'm Doug. Nice to meet you. And that was like my first AA friend, right? And the thing that really set the hook for me was I saw him later that week at another AA meeting, and he remembered my name, and he said, hey, Luke, I saved you a chair. Come sit with me. And like the seconds and inches, right?
You might know my friend Suzanne, who passed away. She was
Yeah.
a delegate from Boston. Some people here may have known her from Eastern Mass. Suzanne S. I went up to be a pallbearer at a funeral, but a couple of months ago, she was a long-term friend who I met at the International Conference of Young People in AA years ago. But she always told the story. She died at 64 years old. She was 44 years sober. She came in as a 20-year-old girl, and her daughter from this church is talking about, I want to thank my mother's three communities, her legal community, her gardening community, and her AA community. And I might not know who you are in this room, but you gave me and my brother a life that we would have never had. But one of the things Suzanne always said, regardless of the big book, regardless of being a delegate, regardless of loving AA literature and sponsoring people, if you asked her why she stayed in AA, she would tell you that on her third night as a 20-year-old, she went into a meeting in a church basement in Boston, and there was a tough-looking biker at the door shaking people's hands, and she was so scared she didn't even shake his hand. But when she walked past him, he looked at her and said, "It's going to be okay, little girl." She never had another interaction with that human being for the rest of her life. She never got to know his name. But whatever he said when she sat down that night, it had an impact on her life that, like, wow, maybe this guy's right. Maybe it is going to be okay.
I know you for a couple of years. I got to know Suzanne a little bit. I know something that you mentioned that you both have in common and you care deeply about is young people of Alcoholics Anonymous, YPA. Would you say that YPA played a pretty significant part in your transition into service?
I would say that YPA for me would be like AAA baseball for someone going to the minor leagues. Like, I would not have been in, I learned how to use Excel on a young people's bid committee. Okay? I learned how to use not even Word, but Word Perfect on a young people's bid committee. I learned how to dress like this to negotiate hotel contracts for the International Conference of Young People in AA. And I'm grateful that I did go from young people's service into general service. I think sometimes it's hard to do that because you could be so well known in young people's AA because young people's AA is bizarre and crazy, and it's supposed to be. But it's hard when, like, you can drive up to the New England Conference of Young People AA on, which is always New Year's Eve, and you know like 60 people when you walk into this crazy hotel lobby, but then to make the transition to walk into a district or a GSR meeting, and but it's super, super important. And I can draw a map around the country and trace many a delegate or trustee back to being on some crazy young people's committee in Alcoholics Anonymous.
I think it's interesting to see, just from serving the last 2 years, I've been told that the conference is getting younger. Depends on which way you look in the room, but I think the numbers are there. It's getting slightly younger, and water seeks its level, right? I found the other young punks at the General Service Conference, and I ran around with them, and probably 80 to 90% of the friends that I made the last 2 years, conference delegates, were active in YPA, and they got their start in YPA. And of those people, the amount of those YPA delegates that have become conference committee chairs, right? And when you ask them, you know, where did it all start for them, they say the same thing. They learn the skill set that they use in service today early on in their home groups and in YPA. Do you remember the moment that you've come into Alcoholics Anonymous, you've made it through, you're finally counting days, you're sticking and you're staying, that you realized that there was a world outside of your home group, that there was an AA out there that was bigger than what you were doing? Home group.
Yes, I was at a meeting called West End on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I heard somebody talking about a bid committee for the New York Committee for ICIPA. And I remember I went to the elections, and I remember because I came straight from the softball field, I was bleeding like down my right knee. I had just played in sober softball league, and I got a position there, and I would have never known that it would have changed my life. And yes, I mean, the age levels are dropping, thank God. I mean, I'm not here to say we should have, but it does break my heart a little bit that the average age for a delegate is still over 55, sometimes 58. I mean, I know there's at least one other person in this room who could say what I could say when people ask me why are we behind in technology so much sometimes. I mean, basically, it's because between 1995 and 2008, 10, the people making the technology decisions for AA didn't use technology. I mean, you're talking about people who are in their 60s and 70s who still didn't use email and didn't use things like that, and they were making the decisions for us. So I'm so glad to see this explosion in how we can better carry our message by harnessing what Bill W. called the colossus of communication.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between service and general service? Can you differentiate between the two for us?
I love that question. Yeah. General service is not an equal side of the triangle. It's unity, service, and recovery. And in the original service manual, which is called the Third Legacy Manual, that they gave out in 1955, and if anybody wants it, just ask me and I'll send you a PDF. Bill W. defines service. And he says it's anything from a 10-cent cup of coffee to work at the intergroup to helping a newcomer to institutions. Sometimes one of the reasons that general service is not attractive to other people, and I love general service, but sometimes I think the reason it's not unattractive is it looks like some special club sometimes. Or if I'm traveling from out of town and somebody asks me the question, oh, are you involved in service? Well, that's kind of code, because certain people ask that question and they mean like, are you involved in general service? Because the way I read it, everybody is involved in service. I think the hard part for people in AA is to embrace the service that you're good at. But this is Alcoholics Anonymous. We always want a gift that someone else has. You know? I wanted to be the third baseman for the Yankees. I'm not. I work in the insurance industry, right? I mean, we always want the gift that God gave somebody else instead of recognizing. And so everybody has a gift. It's just finding out what your gift is. General service is just a piece of service.
You talked about gifts. We talk about skill sets. We talk about aptitudes. We talk about all that stuff when we're talking about AA leadership. What do you think it was that made you fit for general service? Why do you think you went that route when, like you said, not everybody does?
I think at different times, it would be something different. When I got involved to be a GSR, and I mean a GSR that went to a district meeting and went to an assembly, it was because of a man named Jimmy D. At that time, he was Jimmy D. from the Bronx. He was a phone company guy, but he was really like the first young people's delegate from the Northeast, the first young person that became a delegate, and at that time, he was 41. But he told me when I got elected to the ICIPA Advisory Council that I could never really learn about the concepts and everything at Young People's, that I needed to become an active member. When I became a delegate later on, I was an alternate delegate where a delegate died and I became a delegate right away. And then when I became a non-trustee director for AA World Services and a trustee, which, by the way, for anybody here that doesn't know, none of those are paid positions. For me, it was not even any AA skill set at the time. It was the career that AA had given me. AA was in big trouble with an unfunded pension liability, which many companies were all across the country in 2008 and 2009. It's why they passed the Pension Guarantee Act. So I think the reason I was chosen at that time was because I had a skill set in my professional career to kind of help right the ship on the unfunded pension liability. So I think at different times, it's different skills that you have that bring you to the forefront.
Flip side of that question, is there anything in general service or in service in AA that you feel has contributed to your professional life?
Oh, my God. Yeah, I mean, everything in my life, at my house or my home or anywhere, you ever take a book out of the library? It has a stamp, property of the Smithtown Town Library. Yeah, everything in my life should be stamped, property of Alcoholics Anonymous. I could give so many experiences. First of all, I mean, AA is the biggest circus in the world. And I say that with as much love for AA as I can. But if you can get something done in AA, you could maybe solve world peace. I mean, if you can pull off getting something done in AA and kind of put a tent around a small circus in AA, yeah, I think that, and I also think and it's not just general service, it's home group service, it's AA, it's sponsoring people, it's being a member of a home group, it's learning to be a worker among workers. You can't teach this anywhere, but it is like almost an unfair advantage in the regular world. And a lot of us come to realize that.
So you have the experience of getting sober young. You have the experience of becoming a delegate young. Would you say that that was unique, being so young as a delegate?
At that time, yes. Yeah, I was 32. There had been a couple of delegates over the years before that, very few. I remember when I showed up to pick up my delegate package at the Minneapolis International Convention, and the person asked me if I was picking up somebody else's. Yeah, but I will say this, like, you know, in every group, there's going to be somebody who's maybe not the kindest to you, but overall, I was treated like a delegate. I got elected to be the chair of the Public Information Committee that year. I felt like I was given as much respect as anyone else. Does a unique pattern? Yeah, I mean, I often think of Madeleine Albright. She was a Secretary of State. Has nothing to do with whatever politics. I could care less what politics people believe in. But I do always remember something she said, which was she was asked if she ever thought she would be Secretary of State. And she said, well, when she was a young woman in kindergarten and first grade, there was no such thing as a female Secretary of State. So I think about that unique ability, like to be able to meet people in AA, because I was a delegate in '99, and give other people the opportunity to see that you can be a delegate. There are delegates who are our age. So that's probably been the best, I would say, use of God's work with me. Has not been anything I've done. It's been to put on display God's work, to show other people who are interested in service. And, you know, I have a lot of thoughts on that, on why so many young people can't serve today. And, yeah.
It's a pretty unique perspective to come in young, to get involved in service, and to serve at the lower levels of the triangle, like you've kind of done from top to bottom. It gives you a unique view of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would imagine. What are some things looking at AA today that are different from when you first got here?
Well, obviously, the biggest one is since the pandemic, virtual technology. I'm not here to say people should go to meetings virtually or not go to meetings virtually, but I think about the power inside service that virtual technology and all technology has. Like, that is definitely, when I look at the meeting guide app, it's probably the single greatest daily thing that the General Service Office has done for the individual AA member's life that they see every day. I like to tell people that, you know, what's important to know is that we voted down doing that like for 15 years. People who didn't use technology. So, you know, things take time, but I also see, you know, where embracing, changing some of the literature and doing things to attract, we want to attract everybody that might be an alcoholic. Sometimes I think service, though, is like the last one that wants to change. Like, we want to do things the way we did them 10 years ago. I tell people all the time, like, does your district meeting meet on the same night it did 40 years ago at the same time? When 90% of the people who went to district meetings were men in their 50s who worked 9 to 5 with wives at home? Like maybe there is a chance, like, has AA service only been for people who work days, that if you work in the service industry or work at nights, we can never have a district meeting during the day? I think about those things all the time. I think about all the positions in AA today. The alternate delegate is a position that was created. It used to be the area chair was the alternate delegate. The front of area meeting rooms didn't look like a wedding dais, you know? There were like 3 or 4 people. I also think that, you know, like, I moved for my career 3 times, significant moves, all because people don't work for the same company for 40 years anymore in one pension system. And I think where we've failed the most in service is all the young or even not young servants who became a GSR or a DCM or something else someplace else, and they move, and people are like, yeah, you got to start at being an alternate GSR again. Really? Really? When you get traded from the Yankees to the Mariners and you're the starting third baseman, no one sends you back to single A digits, okay? No, they just know you're the best third baseman. And I don't think we've found a way. I think AA service is still very stuck in the past a lot and not realizing how global the world we live in is today. And hopefully we can, there's still, I want to say, 50% of the 93 areas where you can't be a delegate unless you served as a DCM in that area. That is so old-fashioned. That is so insane. Like, we're going to take somebody who has great AA service and we're going to tell them, yeah, we don't want what you have to do here. So, but there's many things we do better, for sure. A lot of things we do better.
So I promise.
Delegate reports used to be 10 minutes after the General Service Conference. Somebody who is just at a week representing their area. I mean, I could just talk about what PowerPoint has done for AA. Like, there was no such thing as a PowerPoint presentation of being able to, like, show the person like they were there, like you. Like, the things we've been able to do to, like, get people engaged is incredible. It's so much better than it used to be.
I could talk to you for another hour about the way carrying information to the fellowship from the General Service Conference has changed in just the couple of years that I've been involved in General Service. But it feels like a lot of the growing pains around the thing, right? A lot of the stuff that we experience around Alcoholics Anonymous in General Service is this different pace at which society changes around us and the rate at which we change in Alcoholics Anonymous, particularly General Service. With that in mind, how important do you think that Tradition 1 is to our future?
I mean, if we don't have it, we lose AA. I mean, it's super, super important. I mean, I was taught by certain people when I became a director and a trustee that, I mean, the difference between, like, I'm on some other boards for nonprofits, but the difference when you're on the AA board is the first question you have to ask yourself is not that is it good business, but does it fit within our within our 12 traditions, particularly usually tradition 7, but all of them. But then if it does fit in them, you have to ask yourself the further question, even if it does fit in our traditions, is it going to mess with AA's unity? And I think that's something we have to be very careful about. I think we have to accept that we have different sides of the AA audience, and, you know, we have to deal with change. Obviously, population changes, society changes, but we have to do things in a way that doesn't mess with that unity, especially when I was a delegate, nobody was getting an email from another delegate beating me to sending out the information, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in a time when there was a morning and night newspaper, okay? I grew up in a time when there was ABC, NBC, CBS News at 6 o'clock, and then World News Tonight, but not a 24-hour news cycle, right? No email. I mean, people don't realize this. Who here knows the original 2 area codes in New Jersey?
201, 609.
Exactly. 201 and 609. Most people don't realize this. The AA service map, when written with states that had multiple areas, was divided by area code to keep costs down. That's at a time like when I grew up, when your mother screamed when the phone bill came in, and who made long-distance calls, right? So the map was written to keep costs down. At a time when also somebody in every area, every 2 years, had to go to training for bulk mail, because we communicated by bulk mail. You know, people say, oh, Bill W. wanted it to go from the office to the delegate to the DCM to the GSRs. No, that had nothing to do with spirituality. That had to do with bulk mail. That had to do with keeping costs down. And when I think today, I think that's the biggest problem we face in service is that GSRs know, why didn't you just put me on that email? Why did you have to send it to the delegate who had to send it to the DCM, who had to send it to me? But my friend in Connecticut got it 2 weeks earlier? Because, I'm not sure we have embraced that enough, and it's something we're going to have to face as a fellowship. But that is the truth. They were all based on bulk mail and keeping phone costs down.
Well, Billy, I think we made a good start on fixing this thing. We didn't get all the way there, and I promised I'd leave a couple of minutes at the end for Q&A and for the announcement, so I'm going to turn it back over to Caitlin. But, Billy, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
hanging out tonight.
I too could listen to you guys for another hour, but we did promise to open the floor.
We'll be in the parking lot.
Okay. If you guys just want to, if you have any questions, just come on up to the mic. Don't be shy. So we'll leave a few minutes here for some questions before we announce the winner of the app off. So come on up, you guys.
One more question, if you
I do have one.
you go first.
So, one of the things that I think some people in this room might be thinking is a service position that they might put themselves in a position to be open to taking in the future. So just for yourself, do you have a way that you think about that for yourself? Like what process, do you consider when taking on a service position?
Obviously, I'm not a big believer in, so-and-so went to the bathroom, we're going to elect that person, right? Congratulations, you were just elected, you came back. But I think if you are thinking about a position at a district or an area, you should talk to the person who already has it or who has done it to find out the time commitment. You should make sure that you have enough time in your life. On the other hand, I kind of feel like we've overcomplicated service, and I would tell anyone who wants to be a change agent to not be afraid to step up. Like I've had people come to me and say, oh, you know what, I don't think I can do it, I'm going back to school. Well, no, Bill W. didn't want people who go back to school not to be involved in service. We wanted everybody. So maybe there's a way that it could be done different, but at least to find out the time commitment if you have that time in your life. Your overall life, your AA recovery life, your work life, your family life, can you fit it in there? And do you think you have the skill set that that position has or needs? I'm not afraid to say that not everybody is qualified for every position.
Thank you.
Luke had a question.
This was a little selfish, but I spent the night with you guys, so I'm going to ask it. What advice do you have for a rotating delegate, Billy?
I have a lot of advice about rotation, and some of it is not well received by certain people in the AA service structure, which it's okay, we can have differences of opinion. I worry about anyone who has to worry about rotating. Like if you have to rotate back into frontline AA recovery, yeah, you've already harmed yourself. Like I don't worry about you because what you said earlier in the meeting, that you're already going to some more meetings and going to the shoreline. And I think you have to just embrace being anonymous in an anonymous program, I don't think, I know that when I rotated out from the General Service Board, I had a busy year. I was the chair of AA World Services that year. I was ready to ride my motorcycle and go to more Metallica concerts and learn how to golf finally. And another 12-step fellowship came to me, Heroin Anonymous. And, we have 7 non-alcoholics who serve on our board. And they said, Billy, we'd like you to serve on our board. And I was like, I really but serving on that board and getting that view is some of the best experience I've ever had in my life. But I do believe in that. I worry about a little bit of service today because, and nothing against anyone who's currently involved or whatever, but we've had more disunity at the general service level in the last 6 years than we've had in a long time. Yet we have more meetings. We have area chair national meetings, national alternate delegate meetings. We have national delegate meetings. We have all this extra complicated service stuff. Whereas my friend Jimmy from Texas, when he showed up at his first time as a trustee, he got up at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning of the board weekend to talk to his sponsees. And we all eat breakfast together, usually at General Service Board weekends. And when he got down to the breakfast table, somebody said, "Oh, how's your morning going?" He said, "Oh, great, but I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I had to talk to my sponsees." And another trustee said to him, "Oh, you're going to have to stop doing that. You're not going to have time to sponsor." And yet I talk to other delegates in certain parts of the country who tell me that they hear that message too. I get calls from new delegates every year right before the conference in February and March, and they all ask me, "Billy, how can I be really prepared for the conference?" And I always tell them the same thing, drop the service manual. Whatever you know about the concepts and the traditions, you know already. You want to be good at the General Service Conference? Be in contact with newcomers coming into Alcoholics Anonymous on the firing line. See what newcomers are up to today. See who we are serving, who is our audience. That'll make you a much better person. So my advice on rotation is never rotate out of being a good old AA member. Whatever position you have, stay locked in. Might not be very popular, but...
All right, thank you guys. Let's please thank Billy and Luke again. All right.